Star Wars, Young Jedi Knights, Heirs of the Force, Chapter 6. The warm afternoon sparkled in the heavy, moist air as Chewbacca accompanied his uncle and Han Solo back to the Millennium Falcon. Beside him, the Solo twins chattered gaily, apparently oblivious to the thick jungle heat. He could sense an underlying tension, though. Jason and Jaina would miss their father every bit as much as he would miss his uncle Chewbacca, his mother, and the rest of his family back on Kashyyyk. Lobaka's golden eyes flickered uneasily about the clearing in front of the great temple. He was still uncomfortable with the wide open spaces so close to the ground. On the Wookiee homeworld, all cities were built high on the tops of the massive entwining trees, supported by sturdy branches. Even the most courageous of Wookiees seldom ventured to the inhospitable lower levels of the forest, much less all the way to the ground, where dangers abounded. To Lobaka, height meant civilization, comfort, safety, home. And although the enormous Masashi trees towered up to 20 times as high as any other plant in Yavin 4, compared with the trees in Kashyyyk, they were midgets. Lobaka wondered if he would ever find a place high enough on this small moon to make him feel at ease. Loie was so lost in thought that he was startled to see that they never had arrived at the Falcon. Never have the chance to do a pre-flight when you're under fire, Han Solo said, but it's a good idea when you do have the time. Standing in front of the entry ramp, he smiled disarmingly at them. If you kids aren't too busy, Chewie and I could use some help doing the pre-flight checks. Great, Jane said before anyone else could respond. I'll take the hyperdrive. She rushed up the ramp, pausing for only a millisecond to brush a kiss on her father's cheek. Thanks, Dad. You're the best. Han Solo looked immensely pleased for a long moment before bringing himself back to business with a shake of his head. Oh, so kid, got any preferences? He looked at Loie, who thought briefly, then rumbled his reply. Although Han Solo had doubtless understood him very well, the pesky translator droid picked up, Master Lobaka wishes to inspect your ship's computer systems in order that they might tell it where to go. Han Solo gave Chewbacca a sidelong glance. Thought you might need fixing that thing, he said, indicating EMTD. It needs an attitude adjustment. Chewbacca shrugged eloquently, gave a menacing growl, and administered emergency repair procedure number 1. He held the silvery oval with one blue hand while he shook the little droid until the circuits rattled. Oh, dear me, perhaps I could have been a bit more precise, the little droid squealed hastily. Master Lobaka expresses desire to perform the pre-flight checks on your navigational computer. Good idea, kid, Han Solo agreed, briskly rubbing his palms together. Jason, you take the exterior hull, see if there's anything nestled in the exterior vents in the last couple of hours. I'll start on the life support systems. Chewie, you check on the cargo bay. The last was said with a lift of his chin and a twinkle in his Han Solo's eyes that Chewbacca knew must have been something to the older Wookiee. But Loie hadn't a clue. He wondered dispiritedly if he would ever understand humans as well as his uncle did. The Navicomputer was an enjoyable challenge. Loie ran through all the pre-flight measurements twice, not because he thought he might have missed something the first time, but because the two places he felt most at home were in the treehouse and in front of a computer. By the time Loie completed his second run-through, Han Solo was already finished with the light support systems, and now checking out the ship's emergency power generator. When he saw Lobaka, Han wiped his hands on a greasy rag, tossed it aside, and held up one finger as if an idea had just come to him. Why don't you give your uncle a hand in the cargo hold while I finish up here? His roguish grin was even more lopsided than usual. Lobaka wondered what his smile meant and why his uncle would still need help with the cargo. Sometimes humans were very difficult to understand. With a shrug, he headed toward the cargo bay. Excuse me, Master Lobaka, EMTD piped up, but you will be needing my translating services at this time. Lobaka growled a negative. Very well, sir, EMTD said. In that case, would you mind if I put myself into a brief shutdown cycle? If you should require my assistance for any reason, please do not hesitate to interrupt my rest cycle. Loie assured EMTD that the miniature translating droid would be the first to know if he needed anything from him. He found his uncle clambering across a mountain of crates and bundles, checking the securing straps. Apparently, Lando Calrissian needed a good many supplies for his new mining operation. Even in the crowded cargo hold, he breathed deeply, enjoying the mix of familiar smells, speeder fuel, machined metal, lubricants, space rations, and Wookiee sweat. Enough to make him homesick for the treetop cities of Kashyyyk. He would have little access to speeders or computers while he studied at the Jedi Academy, with the exception, of course, of EMTD, but perhaps he could console himself occasionally by climbing the jungle trees and thinking of home. Maybe he would do that after the Falcon took off, but for now there was work to do. Lowy asked his uncle what needed to be done and began checking the webbing of a pile of cargo that Chewbacca indicated. The straps and webbing were loose, and so was the cloth that covered the pile. So loose, in fact, that as Lobaka began to work, the covering slid away entirely. His jaw dropped, and he stepped back to admire what he had accidentally uncovered. The air speeder, dismantled into large components, was still recognizable. It was an older model, a T-23 Skyhopper, with controls similar to an X-wing fighter, but with dihedral wings and a passenger seat and a cramped cargo compartment at the rear of the cockpit. The blue metallic hull had been battered and stained with age, but the engine mounted between the wings looked in serviceable condition. He glanced up to find his uncle staring at him expectantly. Then, to his great surprise, Chewbacca asked Lowy what he thought of the craft. The Skyhopper was compact and well constructed. It wouldn't take much to put all the pieces together again. He complimented the vintage speeder lines and ventured a guess as to its range and maneuverability. Of course, the onboard computer probably needed a system overhaul, and the exterior could use a bit of bodywork, but those were only minor drawbacks. The dings and scars in the hull only served to add character. With a satisfied growl, Chewbacca spread his arms wide and shocked Lowy by telling him the T-23 would be a going-away gift. The speeder belonged to Lobaka, if he could assemble it. Lobaka stood next to his T-32 in a clearing with Jason and Jaina and waved goodbye. After a flurry of hugs, exchanged thanks and last-minute messages, they watched as Han and Chewbacca climbed back toward the ship. Now, as the Millennium Falcon cleared the treetops and angled into the deep blue sky, the three young Jedi trainees continued waving, each lost in thought for a long moment as they gazed after the departing ship. At last, Jaina heaved a sigh. "Well, Lowy," she said, rubbing her hands together with a look of gleeful anticipation as she looked at the battered T-23. "Need any help getting this bucket of bolts up and running?" Realizing that even though Jaina was younger, she probably had more experience tuning speeder engines than he did, he gratefully nodded. They spent the next few hours prepping the T-23 for its first flight on Yavin. Jason occupied himself by telling jokes that Lowy didn't understand or fetching tools for the enthusiastic mechanics. Jaina smiled as she worked, glad to get the rare chance to share what she knew about speeders and engines and T-23s. When at last they finished and Lobaka leaned into the cockpit to switch on the engine, the T-23 crackled, sputtered, and roared to life. It lifted off the ground on its lower repulsor lifts, and a bright glow spluttered from the iron afterburners. The three friends let out two cheers and a bellow of triumph. "Need anyone to take her for test flight?" Jane asked hopefully. Lobaka stumbled over a tentative answer. "What Master Lobaka is trying to say," EMTD, who had long since finished his rest cycle, "is that as kind as your offer is, he would vastly prefer to pilot the first flight himself." Lobaka grunted once. "And?" the little droid replied. "What do you mean? And? Oh, I see, the other thing you said. But, sir, you didn't mean..." Lobaka growled emphatically. "Well, if you insist," EMTD said. "Master Lobaka also says that he'd be honored to have you as his passenger, Mr. Strana. However, let me assure this last statement was made with the utmost reluctance." Lobaka groaned and hit his forehead with the heel of one hairy hand, with a Wookiee expression of complete embarrassment. "Well, it's certainly the truth," EMTD said defiantly. "I am certain I didn't get the intonation wrong." Jason, who had been first disappointed at Lobaka's reluctance, now seemed most amused by his chagrin. "I understand, Lowy," she said. "I'd want to take her out on my own the first time, too. How about giving us a ride tomorrow?" Relieved that the twins were not upset, Lobaka loudly agreed, jumped into the cockpit, and strapped himself in. The whine of the engines drowned out EMTD's attempt at translating. Lowy raised a hand in salute, waited until Jason and Jaina were clear, brought the engines to full power, and took off, headed towards the vast jungle. The T-23 maneuvered well, and Lobaka reveled in the feeling of heightened freedom as he streaked away. But still he found himself yearning for one more thing, something he had been thinking of all day. The trees. Tall, towering, safe trees. Scarcely half an hour later, far away from the Jedi Academy and the Great Temple, he landed the T-23 on the sturdy treetops, settling the craft into the uppermost branches of the Misasi trees. The tree canopy was not as high as he was used to. The air was thinner, and the jungle smells, though not unpleasant, were different from those of Kashyyyk. Even so, Lobaka felt more at peace now than he had at any other moment since landing on Yavin 4. Jason had said that the huge orange gas giant overhead was best viewed from a Misasi tree, and the human boy was definitely right. Lowy looked around in all directions, at the sky and the trees, at the crumbly ruins of smaller temples visible through the streaks in the canopy. He stared at the languid rivers, at the strange vegetation and animals around him. He sighed with relief. He couldn't find a place of contentment and solitude on this moon, a place where he could think of family and home while studied to be a Jedi. As the late afternoon sunlight slanted through the thick branches, a distant glint caught Lobaka's eye. He wondered what it could be. It was not the color of any vegetation or temple ruins. The light reflected from shiny and evenly shaped objects stuck partly up a tree. Lobaka leaned forward, as if that could help him see more clearly. He wished he had brought a pair of macro binoculars. Curiosity and wonder struck a spark of excitement in him. He wanted to get closer, but caution intervened. It was getting dark, and after all, if the object was important, wouldn't someone have seen it long ago? Perhaps not. He doubted it could be seen from the jungle floor, and was unlikely that many students came out and climbed to the top of the canopy, this far from the great temple. He was almost certain that no one knew about his discovery. Heart-pounding, Lobaka made a mental note of the shiny object's location. He would come back the very first chance he got. He had to find out what it was.